has had a pretty extensive career, 30-plus year career, working to really clarify the value proposition of design within large corporations. She worked for 30-some years at HP with their chief design officer and their upper management to be able to enunciate the value proposition of design within the organization. Thereafter, Deb and I met for the first time while working on value frameworks for the Design Management Institute, I guess about 4 or 5 years ago now. And we started a company together called Curate. Deb's also continued to consult with very large organizations to bring design value to the fore and consciousness about what design can do within those organizations to them. So without further ado, we'll talk a little bit about the value of design.
So thank you for spending a little bit of time this afternoon with us. And today we wanted to talk about this idea that design creates value.
Design creates value?
Well, we know design creates value. The real question is, how do we talk about the way that design creates value? Well, one of the things that has been done multiple times, both the UK Design Council and the Design Management Institute are two of the organizations that have done this, is they've looked at design at a macro level. And they've said, can we look at the performance of companies that are rich in design and compare them to their counterpart companies who are not known for being in design? And do we see a difference in how those companies perform in the market? And lo and behold, whether it's companies based in the UK, companies based in the US, or there was one that's done looking at global stocks, there's a difference. And they typically look at a portfolio of companies that meet a certain set of criteria around design richness. And they look at the stock's performance over a period of 7 to 10 years. And they compare that to similar companies in the same market. And in general, there's over a 200% difference in performance for companies that are heavy in design or rich in design compared to their counterparts. And this study has been repeated multiple times over the last probably 15 years with similar results.
The companies were chosen by a panel that had a consensus about which were the design leaders in the world at the time among companies that were listed in these kinds of exchanges. The list changed. I think they dropped one company midstream, but everybody else has been pretty consistently in the forefront of the design conversation. Another thing that design does is it drives price premiums. This is one of the most famous case studies in industrial or product design. On the left, we have a potato peeler. On the right, we have a potato peeler. The difference is that the company that created the one on the right is Smart Design. It's a consultancy in New York. The owner of Smart Design and the owner of a kitchenware company that produced commodity products got together, and Smart Design guy convinced them to do Smart Design. What they started off looking at was bicycle grips, things that you could hold more readily in order to be able to hold onto a bicycle, hold onto a power tool, things that enabled the human grip to be better. And out of this was born OXO Good Grips. This is a price premium of about 10 times what the other tool costs and a margin far higher than the other tool. So design can certainly drive price premiums within products.
Design can also disrupt the competitive advantage. For years, the world of white goods, washers, dryers, etc., was pretty static. People can only get clothes so much cleaner, dry so much drier. And so there really wasn't a lot of innovation in the industry until all of a sudden you saw LG and Whirlpool come out with designer appliances, things that not only functioned, not only cleaned the clothes and dried the clothes, but were aesthetically pleasing, were things that people wanted to showcase in their designer homes. And again, they also made some changes to the ergonomics, improved the usability, improved the sustainability quotient. And so they made a lot of changes, not just in what you think of as the form, fit, finish, but in some of the other characteristics. And so they reinvigorated the market, and they changed the price points in many of these products, again, through the use of design.
They completely disrupted the competitive landscape. We all know the brand on the right. A lot of people say that Apple has led by design. One might argue that they've led by brand design, and that while all of their products from an industrial design standpoint are well designed, the idea of a consistent quality brand that is reinforcing a message that's consistent is how they've applied design more than in any other way. Any kind of product that Apple produces, we don't even need to talk about, we know it's an Apple product right off the bat. It's because of the brand connection with the product design.
Design has also been used to help create and craft new market segments. So if you look at the world of the hybrid, prior to the emergence of the hybrid, the Prius, we had a handful of auto markets or sub-markets: economy, intermediate, SUV, etc. With the introduction of the hybrid, a new market was formed. The world of somebody who was not only interested in getting from point A to point B, but making a statement and how they wanted to contribute and play in the world and in the environment. And so not only is it the look of the product, but it's also the overall experience of the product.
This is an even more recent example. So has anybody ever stayed in an Airbnb? Have you tried this? Yeah. So Airbnb was actually founded by 2 Rhode Island School of Design, industrial design graduates, right? And this is a case of design and designers, first off, doing business model design, and then secondly, creating a UX or UI experience that's second to none in terms of reserving these spaces online. So they really use design to found a company, to create a business model, and then, moreover, to create the experiences that constitute what Airbnb is today.
Steelcase has often been looked at as a company that uses design to innovate environments. In this case, internal workplace environments. On the left, you see what many of us end up working in a situation where it's a desk, a chair, and whatever else you can scrounge and use in order to get your work done. And on the right, you see a Steelcase designed workspace, a workspace that's been optimized. It addresses the ergonomics, and addresses both the need for somebody to pay attention to heads down work and collaborative work in a way that's not only aesthetically pleasing, but oftentimes uses less floor space and in a more efficient and effective way.
So this is where interior design meets furniture design, meets human factors design. They've done more productivity studies than just about any furniture company in the world. And they believe in the design so much that they actually purchased IDEO sometime back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, as what they believe is really the future of their company, and you know, they bought them. I mean, they really wanted to invest in design and have this as having the best capability in the world for design as a competitive edge and a way of bringing better productivity to offices everywhere.
So what you see here are just 6 examples of how design creates value. There are actually many more, but we just wanted to highlight some of the varied ways that design can create value in the world.
I think that, when we think about AUS and we think about the different disciplines that we have here, every single design discipline that we offer in the school is represented in these 6 examples, and there are countless more examples. But, graphic design in particular used to be thought of as something that added value in terms of clarifying communications or making communications more persuasive. And now the bulk of graphic design graduates are going into programs that are oftentimes UX heavy, user experience heavy, UI heavy, and some of the other design disciplines that used to do design research and look at the functional attributes of design. Well, communication design is really now becoming very much a functional discipline within these new genres. But how do we talk about design value to people that aren't designers? Because a little bit of this is now preaching to the choir from the likes of the audience that we have here, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we talk about design value, particularly when the corporation hasn't yet seen what we could do for them? When we're talking with business people that say, okay, I have this project, now why do you want to charge me all that for design? Why should I invest in design? What should I do? Why should I bring a designer into my organization? And this is the kind of difficult conversation that you have. Even in companies that have been using design for decades, a design department internally still has to be able to justify and clarify their value proposition within the company. Always. We all have to enunciate our value proposition, whatever we do as a discipline. Right? So the accounting department has to prove their value within a corporation. Well, so does the design department. Right? How do we have that conversation?
Well, one of the models that we like to use looks at it from different frames, different vantage points. So when we think about traditional business, we think about business people talking about things like ROI, profit, being perceived as very logical, being metrics driven, having departments that can do forecasting and look at risk management. They're all about being able to be reliable and predictable, so that especially if they're a publicly held company, their shareholders, the people that own stock, feel confident that they're a good, solid, viable investment as a company. So it's all about this reliability and predictability and consistency of path forward.
I think we could talk about a lot more fun stuff on the design side. We have empathy, we have creativity, we have intuition, we like making stuff, we like being inclusive. And a lot of the recent conversations have been around design providing validity of ideas, not necessarily reliability, but having valid ideas that maybe haven't been proven yet, and also being able to be very responsive to changing market conditions, changing consumer conditions.
Well, Roger Martin has suggested that the way that we can really see the most power is by finding that intersection, combining the value of business and the value of design together. Looking at that sweet spot of where we use both reliability and creativity.
And certainly the book, The Design of Business, is something we'd recommend for you to check out if you haven't already, regardless of whether you're coming from engineering or business or design. Roger Martin's really able to take a lot of this stuff and put it into business speak.
Mm-hmm. Because after all, we need businesses to be able to speak the language of design.
We need design to speak the language of business.
And frankly, a lot of times in a lot of the programs, we as designers do not learn much about how to speak the language of business. One of the things that we always hope for is this silver bullet, this magic answer that says, what is the metric? What is the answer? How is design measured? And people expect a formula. And the reality is design value is a language that uses multiple frameworks, much like any other discipline. Many other disciplines talk about their value. but they don't do it in just one framework or one formula, and neither should we. So as part of Design Management Institute, we brought together some of the world's thinkers in the area of design value, and we started to say, how can we create a fundamental system of frameworks that all fit together and complement each other, and that help to articulate different aspects of how design adds value. As we talked about, design adds lots of different types of value. So what you see here is one framework, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a few minutes. And this framework helps to address things like, what role does design to play? How well is design doing playing that role? And what should design do in the future for the organization? Here's another framework, which again we'll get into a little bit more detail just in a minute. But this framework doesn't come across very well on the projector, but this framework is different. It says, where is design adding value? How is it creating value? How much value is it? What kind of value is it? If you notice, what you see is all of these questions talk about design, all of these questions talk about value, but they're different aspects, they're different questions of that conversation around value.
They're different frames.
So the design maturity matrix is one of the frames. It covers all of the range of design disciplines. So it's not just good for industrial designers. It's not just good for experienced designers. It really is intended to cover the range. And it aligns with some known business framework best practices. In this case, the Carnegie Mellon maturity model that's been used as a framework in lots of approaches, lots of disciplines, to look at the maturity of capabilities and processes. The other thing that was a design intent behind this framework is that it's important that the framework be non-judgmental. In other words, there's no good place to be in the framework. There's no good answer. There is no one size fits all. But again, this framework is very helpful when we need to talk about things like the role design plays. How well it is playing that role. What should it be playing in the future compared to what it was playing in the past?
Before this model, there was another model that was introduced by the Danish Design Council. And what they were first talking about, it's a ladder. It looks like a bunch of steps. And the first step says, okay, aesthetics. And then the second step is function. And then the next step is, I don't know, management or strategy. And it kind of goes up. And so it almost by default was saying, oh, you know, I graduate beyond just being able to make pretty pictures to function, and then from that to strategy, and I go up this as if one is more valuable than another. And we're having a conversation in this larger group at DMI, and I said, well, wow, that's rather Northern European, isn't it? You know, Northern Europeans, they value function over form. They value strategy over function and form, right? Really Northern European-centric model. And at the time, my wife Lucy was working on some Ferragamo eyewear. And so she was telling me about the history of Salvatore Ferragamo, right? Now here's a man that has designed the most amazing shoes that were ever designed in the 20th century, right? Some absolutely beautiful shoes. He starts off when he's 8 years old. He moves to Hollywood. He designs these shoes for celebrities. Aesthetically, these are just amazing shoes. I don't even like shoes. These are amazing shoes, right? This guy is doing amazing work, and the value of his shoes is far beyond anything that's existed before in the history of footwear. Now tell me that aesthetics are less valuable to his company than strategy, right? And so by eliminating this bias of a European framework that says this aspect of design is more valuable than another aspect of design, by saying, hey, there are multiple frames through which design can provide this value, this kind of a framework, this kind of a non-judgmental framework was born that says, okay, everybody's got a different level of maturity in different aspects of design. And what we have to be able to do is clearly enunciate where we are from a maturity perspective in the design world in order to say, hey, As Ferragamo, we believe that these aesthetics are really important, and we're going to focus in on that, and we're going to develop our maturity to an extent that that becomes a core capability.
So here's an example where I was working with a large global company, and I was working with 3 of the design teams. It's a company that has multiple design teams. Design team over here is a customer insight team. It's part of their global strategy organization. It's a global function, and they do design research. They've been around for about 10 years. They do amazing design research. If you notice, they're over on the right, trying to inform and influence business and strategies and models, business models, and they're kind of all off by themselves. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. On the left-hand side, you see a UI team number 2. UI team number 2 was acquired about a year ago from a company, another company. They are amazingly good at agile UI design. Not so good at understanding why they're doing their design and what's to come next. But they are amazingly good at cranking out their design. They're extremely efficient at doing what they're told. You see them over on the left, developing and delivering, sometimes not always understanding why, but really being able to produce, crank it out. Product team number 3 was fairly new. It was about 6 months old when I started working with them. They were tasked with starting to have to work between some of the technical teams, the product team, the platform team, the UI team, whatever, and starting to try to bridge the gap into what the corporate research people knew. So you see, they're lower down. They're still in that kind of ad hoc or initial mode because they're inventing themselves. The reality is this is a new team that gets an opportunity to invent themselves. And by being able to look at this, they started to say, you know, rather than move up, rather than try to become more efficient, we need to start to spread out a little bit more and do a better job of connecting with this team. But we can start using this framework to start talking about where do they play? Where do they play today, and where do they play, or should they play in the future?
So I'm just going to deconstruct a little bit about what Deb's saying. Has anybody ever met a company or been around a company that has no exposure to design or doesn't have designers at all? Yeah, maybe, a couple of them. So everybody starts down here, right? Everybody starts down here in this initial ad hoc or heroic efforts. If you're a designer and all of a sudden a company says, oh, wow, you know what, my niece, she's a great designer, why don't you bring her in to do some of this letterhead and stationery for us, right? Or my nephew, hey, you know, I understand that he's going to get a graduate degree in product design, or whatever this is. And they introduce somebody into the company to try to create something new for the company, some new value, essentially, because that's what design's trying to do, is create some new value, a new identity, a new product, whatever this is. So that's an initial ad hoc or heroic effort. What that means is it's not yet integrated within the process and the language and the culture of the company. And so no matter what, something starts in down here, unless you've got a founding team that literally integrated it within the organization, and even there it's going to be somewhat heroic or ad hoc. It's not easy to just be the new Lone Star designer in a company.
And more importantly, at that level, if that person leaves, it goes away.
Gone.
It's gone.
So maybe we can go through this just a little bit. So repeatable.
Repeatable just means that they can do it again a second time. They can do it again a second time with somewhat expected results. As we move up into the area of defined, that means when they add somebody new to the team, that new person can repeat what people prior had been able to do. It's not so that it's so prescriptive that everybody has to do it lockstep, but that when new people join, they know how to pick up and join in.
So at several different DMI events, this whole chart was put up to sort of ascertain what kind of corporations, where they are in this whole world of maturity, right? And this level, this defined level, there was a giant chunk of companies developing and delivering products and services at a defined level, but no higher. So what that means is you've got this design department, they have a process, they know they can do this, they can repeat the process, but they haven't yet gone up into the next level, which is understanding that they're, qualitatively changing these processes and adapting and getting metrics and understanding how they as a design department can elevate their profile, repeat their overall processes in a way that they can measure and show improved results over time.
Sometimes people will call that a learning organization. This manages a learning organization, or having a feedback an appropriate feedback mechanism. And the real difference between managed and optimized is whether the information used to change your processes, improve your processes, are primarily internal, i.e. we said we were going to do this, we did this, versus optimized, we said we were going to do this, we did this, we measured it, and somewhere down the line, when it was out in the marketplace, it actually performed, the overall outcome performed the way we expected. And so it's farther removed that we're tracking that our contributions have the ultimate outcome rather than we're measuring our outputs.
There are very few companies in the world that are really up in that upper left quadrant. They tend to be smaller, they tend to be boutique, like a Ferragamo or something like this, where it's an aesthetically focused product. It's something that design has always been integrated into the development, it's continually improving.
Well, and if we look at the 3 columns, there are 3 columns, and they're on purpose, because as you saw in this example of these 3 teams, there's different reasons why organizations have design. On the left, product and delivery, that's what oftentimes people classically think of that designers do. We make products. We design products. We design interfaces. We design experiences. Those are develop and deliver things, stuff.
So in the middle, the systems and processes piece, a lot of what design needs to do today is to have a conversation with multiple disciplines, to essentially be the oil in the machine, the lubricant that helps everything run together. And this is what happens when you start to connect and integrate processes. So if you're a design management student in particular, this is a lot of your job outside of managing those development and delivery. That's kind of a first project management level. But as you mature within a design management career, you start to look at how you're doing cross-discipline activities, how you're enabling engineering and marketing and design, and even things like accounting and distribution systems to work together and use things like design thinking to get to the next place. And so you're a connector, you're an integrator.
And in large-scale organizations or systems, whether it's a multinational company, or in the case of I did some work with a large metropolitan area, city and surrounding areas. This is very difficult actually to do because it isn't just in your control. It isn't just your department. You have to span across multiple departments, multiple geographic locations oftentimes, multiple entities, sometimes governments, businesses, competitors, customers, partners. You have to actually span across all of them to get a design to work in a system.
There are a couple people here in our audience, Sawa and Gassan, and we've been having conversations about, well, how can SEN and CAAD collaborate on stuff like workshops, right? This is a connection and integration function. We need to learn each other's language. How does design thinking enable that language? How do we look at designing systems together, being able to cross these disciplines?
And then we've got the far right, where we can take these same design thinking approaches and start applying them to What are we in the business of doing? How are we making money? Where are we playing as a business? What do we want to be known for? This is where you start seeing design get involved with business model innovation like Airbnb, or brand, the brand work that you saw with Apple. That's on the right-hand side.
So an easy way of thinking of these three top things is on the left, the development delivery. We're working on the stuff the company makes or the company communicates. Okay? The middle, we're working within the company to help it operate and connect. And on the right, we're working on the company and where this future of this company might be. Does that make sense? Okay.
One of the other frameworks we talked about and is fundamental is design's role, the design's role map. And again, it's where is it adding value, how is it adding value, what kind of value, how much value, some of those traditional things. Again, it's intended, same design intent, cover the range of design disciplines, be non-judgmental, and in this case it's based on two standard business frameworks. One is the balanced scorecard, as you see represented in the 4 columns, and the other is the APQC, American Process Quality Control Organization's classification, and those roles basically represent the capabilities that any entity has to have to some extent, greater or lesser, with the top area being what they're in the business of doing, i.e. creating and producing and delivering value. And then the lower section being the context, all the things that are what I think of as necessary evils, the things that have to be done in order for them to be in business. And whether it's a business of 2 or it's a business of 200,000, there has to be some amount of vision and strategy. There has to be some amount of creating and producing value and actually delivering it to your intended audience. And there has to be some amount of supporting that audience, helping make sure that they receive the value. Likewise, you've got people as part of your company. That's what developing and managing human capital is about. Even if it's a people of 2 or 200,000, you need to have some amount of effort to manage your people. Manage the information, and it says manage information technology. It's not just the IT. It's all of the information. It's all of the records. It's all of the information that your company is entrusted with. Think of all of the privacy, for instance. Financial resources. At the end of the day, money probably changes hands. You have to be able to track that money and know where it goes and it's going to the right place. Acquiring and constructing and managing assets. Almost every company has some amount of assets, things, physical things that the company has purchased and has to take care of. That's what that that's what that row is about. Managing risk, compliance, and resiliency, whether that's that you're adhering to your local government laws, your tax codes. If you're selling an item, maybe you are having to meet the needs of whatever country you're selling the item into, or the requirements there. It's making sure that you're in compliance with the expectations of others and in the systems that you're choosing to play in. Managing external relationships is all about not just the relationship you have with your customers, but with your suppliers, your subcontractors, your partners, sometimes your competitors, and ultimately developing and managing business capabilities. If as a company you don't invest in and grow your ability to get things done, you aren't ever going to be effective. So that's all about how do you spend enough time and effort to make sure that you actually are doing what it is you want to do. So again, this framework is all of the different parts of a business, the columns, the balanced scorecard. Financial. What's going on in the area of money, of how value is exchanged between you and others, whether it's money or something else, as can be normalized to money. Customer, what's going on with the relationship between your company and others, whether that's your brand, whether that's net promoter score, whether it's your customer satisfaction and loyalty. It's all around customer. Process. How effective and efficient are you being? And capabilities. You've also often heard the words like core competency. What are you good at? What can you do? What assets can you harness to get it done what you need to get done?
So before we had this maturity matrix, how mature is your particular function within the organization? You know, you started off as an ad hoc hero kind of solo designer. You've now built up a department. You're running this department. You've even optimized the processes, and you've gone over and over again. But then, what does that mean relative to the rest of the corporation, right? Because even though you've got your own function, the corporation as a living, breathing entity needs to fulfill all this stuff on the left, right? And all this stuff on the left across these columns is how we rate whether or not this is really a score, something that is a competitive edge relative to other companies. So what we've done is we've said, okay, how mature are we as a design organization or as a design function? And now we move into how can we look at ourselves relative to the overall functions of our company and where we are adding value to the organization, what our role is in adding that value within our organization.
So for instance, that corporate team that we talked about just a minute ago that did customer insights and customer research, they were in the business of capturing and infusing the voice of the customer into the company. So they were all about adding value around the customer. And they were involved primarily at the vision and strategy level. They really only slightly got into the products and services. They were really intended mostly to inform the high-level management and the chief strategy office, chief technology office, etc.
Customer insights is also sometimes called marketing research in some organizations, so just kind of clarify that.
The UI team, you notice their value is a little bit scattered, and that's just because of the way the framework is played out. But they had a couple different goals. They had some people that were all about creating reusable assets, reusable a code that can be used in multiple purposes, and creating platforms of these codes and libraries that can be used. And so you see a lot of investment in the process and capability, because it was all around how do we create these things once that can get replicated and used in lots of other purposes. And then they also were involved with actually putting them together into user interfaces and user experiences. So they were creating the day-to-day experience that the customer was experiencing with the product, and that was a key basis for customer value and customer net promoter scores. And finally, product team 3, that team that was only 6 months old at the time, they were all about figuring out how to take harness all of the values and all of the stuff going on in the rest of the company, and figure out how the company makes money at it by positioning the products in the marketplace. So all of a sudden you see a very different picture from the one that you saw just one framework ahead, about why each of these organizations are in existence in terms of what role they're expected to play in the company, what values they're creating and producing.
So a little trickier to figure out for your team, but it really does help you put what you're doing into context in a company.
And right now you see all of these teams in the upper section, and so you may think, oh, design only plays in the top half. The reality is we use these same frameworks at Design Management Institute conferences and interviewed the participants of the conference and mapped where their design teams lived and what types of values they created, we had dots all over the
Yeah,
place.
a lot of them down here. Develop and manage business capabilities, particularly when the organization's working on the organization and where it might go. The development of intellectual property and the management of intellectual property can often fall within risk and compliance. It really depends on the structure of the organization.
We saw teams that were developing internal applications in order for the employees to be effective and efficient. That was all around information technology. So we really saw that design could play anywhere in this space depending on what the business needed design to do.
A lot of the times what I find is really fascinating about being a designer, working in some of these organizations and some of the experiences that I personally had, is that, you know, once the design team is recognized as being this creative group of people that comes up with solutions in a unique way, the organization will tap into you, even though it's not your core charter, for some of this other stuff. Hey, could you take a look at how it is that we're managing, you know, people in the organization and how it is that we're maybe relocating people from site to site as we need them? How would the design group look at that problem set? I think that's a really interesting thing, especially when you're in design management as a profession. People will start to recognize that you have just different ways of approaching and thinking about the problem sets, and so they want to get your perspective on it. So you really can end up working on all of these aspects of value within an organization.
And there are many more frameworks to this design value system, but we just wanted to highlight these two because these two are rather foundational and look at things somewhat holistically. But there are other frameworks, other references, other things that we can do to learn more about the value of design.
Yeah, so there are a lot of books. We mentioned Roger Martin's book because I think that if you're looking at trying to have a conversation between design and business, since he came from the big five, I think Accenture or one of the other consultancies, McKinsey, he was really able to use business language to describe design. Deb and I work together and actually literally have workshops on design for companies and institutions. We did one in Singapore last year. We were about to do one this week, but then it got shifted. And so we try to work with companies this way. That link at the bottom, dmi.org, that's the association that we work with a lot. Deb and her late business partner Steve, were really the two primary authors of all of that work and did all of the legwork getting people together around the world. There was a professor here, Beatrice Itchel-Croods-Megchun. She was part of the extended team. I can remember being on conference calls with her. I mean, it really was quite a robust activity to understand what was necessary for designers to have this conversation with business. And so, you know, if you start off with some of these matrices, you can really build, even within a couple of days, lots of different ways of looking at and framing your own role within an organization.
And I just wanted to whet your appetite to show this middle, to say, see, these are some of the other frameworks that we have and that we use for different purposes, but they're all dependent on what it is that you're trying to do with understanding and speaking and talking about the value of design.
So it's really fun to look at how, you know, companies like, I guess we had, what was the company in Singapore? Was it LG or Philips?
LG.
LG. So LG was at a workshop next to a graduate student from another discipline, and everybody's looking at design value in organizations from completely different perspectives. But once you set your goal for what it is that you want to accomplish, understanding how to have that conversation actually does fall in a methodology that's accessible that you can work on.
The other thing I wanted to point out is that while we've talked a lot about how we can use these to prove the value of design, in some companies where design value is already a given, think of the Apples, the Nikes, etc., we can use these same frameworks to be able to start making trade-off comparisons. We have these 3 design options. Of these 3 design options, we have limited resources. Which of the ones should we do? We have 2 design options and 2 engineering options. Of these 4 options, which should we do first versus second because we have limited resources?
What has value to the organization? It's oftentimes easier than you think to compare apples to oranges.
Mhm.
Right? This campaign versus this product development project. How do we figure out which one we're going to prioritize? Same kind of value frameworks apply.
And in the real world, in the C-suite, so to speak, the chief technology office, the chief marketing officer, whatever, they wrestle with, do we put some of our resources and funds in this marketing campaign, this engineering effort, this new manufacturing line, this design idea? Where do we put it? And we need to be able to articulate that in a way that those comparisons, the apples to oranges to pears to bananas, can be made.
So hopefully we give you a taste. We're at the end. This is Deb's email address. Please feel free to reach out.
And we do have time for a few questions and answers.
Yes. So
We want to thank you for your time today, and we want to be here to answer your questions.
So, why are you here? I'm curious. What brought you out for design value? I mean, it wasn't required of you, yes? We like what? We like CAAD. The love from Sen. Good. Any thoughts? Who's in design management here? A whole lot of hands. Okay, good.
So how many people were surprised by something you heard this afternoon? Or was this all familiar and you'd seen it all and done it before? Okay.
So where did you get pieces of this? From business or from CAD? Okay. Yeah, so I think that's what we're trying to help you do is to bring that conversation with other students too. Hopefully we can eventually collaborate more on projects where this becomes a really fluid conversation. Now,
So honestly, the two frameworks we showed are not the two I would recommend that they start with. In that final picture where you saw the little thumbnails, there were some other things there that are helpful. One of them is the logic model, which talks about looking at basically what are the resources, what do we expect the resources to do, what outputs should those activities create, which will generate what outcomes to get you to what final business result. And we really suggest that they start by looking at these logic models so that they're doing just the right thing with their handful of resources or their two resources. Yes, yeah, we have, one of our other partners is a business model design expert, and he actually has some books out there on business model design and innovation for startups. And we use some of these customer-centered, design-centered approaches in that.
well, there's another project that Deb just worked on that it was a startup that was going one way with developing medical devices, and then they brought in design for the first time to really look at the business model and whether they could have other opportunities for the technology altogether. And so technology applications, it's a really good thing for design because it can show, I don't know, you maybe can describe your project
Well,
a
as I
little
said,
bit better than me.
with startups, with smaller companies, with NGOs sometimes, we find that we start with these business cases and these logic models and some of the other tools because we want to get extremely pragmatic very quickly and figure out how to put our focus and our emphasis in the most important places for the moment. And so we use those. These other ones are more useful and talking to like venture capitalists about future growth, future plans. If we had more money, this is what we could do and why. So we would use them at a different point in the conversation.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.